Hello, everyone. Welcome to Now Next Later for Monday, June 30th. We always give about 30 seconds at the top of the show for the waiting room to come in. We always appreciate anyone who attends Now Next Later live, 1 p.m. Eastern on Mondays. For this Monday, the last Monday of June, I am excited to be joined by Frank Fiore, the president of Matchbox, and we'll talk a little bit about Frank's businesses and what Matchbox does and what Ignite does and that here at the outset. But thank you again for joining us live. This is always posted to YouTube, so if you miss it, you can find it on YouTube and you can send that link out to your friends and colleagues on the Chrisman Commentary Network here. But thank you, Frank, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Look forward to a good discussion today.
Same here. We always like to kind of push the envelope of where things are going, so we do get into a little forecasting and speculation. But I also like to start with kind of where we came from. It always helps how we got here. And I think personally that everybody knows you, especially if they're involved in the MBA and if they have been doing this work for any amount of time, they've been able to know you, work with you. But for those that don't, for anybody watching that hasn't gotten a chance to work with you, Frank, can you give us a quick sense of Matchbox and your work and how long you've been doing this for lenders and partners?
Sure. I've been in operations my whole career. I had a 10-year career on Wall Street, actually on the equity derivative side of the business. I really enjoyed this interaction between originations and operations. So kind of this hybrid role of trying to translate what the sales teams needed and what an operational teams need was. So when I moved over to the mortgage space, I was still stayed on the operational side, but really tried to embrace technology from the operational side of the business, which that was probably 25 years ago. And there really wasn't a lot of technology in the space at the time. So we moved over to Cadillac and we built some other software and we were on data track. That's a blast from the past. And then over time, we consolidated into Encompass. So when I started Matchbox, I really wanted to help clients understand the use of technology within the mortgage space. I just think it was underutilized, based on my experience thus far at that point, and that was 15 years ago. And it's just grown over time. I think the tech space has really grown over the past 10 years, really, over the past decade, and helping clients understand that on the operational side and how to utilize technology, both on the operational side, origination side, secondary side, and compliance side has been a lot of our time frame. So we spend a lot of time doing that. A lot of our work is on the Encompass side of the house, but we also work with many other technologies. And then about 5 years into Matchbox, we had the opportunity to have a number of clients asking us about custom software integrations with Encompass. So that's where Ignite was born. So the way I like to explain it is Matchbox does everything within the LOS, and Ignite can do everything that connects to the LOS. So we can kind of touch your full ecosystem natively, internally or externally.
Yeah, right on. I knew we were going to have a good conversation today, Frank, because one of the things you and I talk about a lot is change management and the return on investment that lenders should expect. And I'll tell you, as a theme on Now Next Later, if it doesn't come up every single week, it at least comes up so often that we can't avoid it. And one of the things we struggle with is kind of getting specific, right? A lot of times when you're talking about change management and mortgage, you kind of talk in these generalized 30,000 foot levels, but when you and I talk off camera, we tend to talk more directly about what is ops thinking right now? What are the CEOs of lenders thinking right now? What are you hearing from the market? How is the LOS evolving? How is pricing engine and POS changing how you think about the LOS? And we get into a lot of those. So I'm hoping for those in the chat, throw your questions in there. We're going to start on now what the lenders are thinking and hearing, but we're going to get into a lot of those details, in the next 20, 25 minutes. So Thank you. So within the now, next, later structure here, Frank, let's start there on now. Um, what are you hearing from lenders? And we can talk about specific size lenders too, if you want to kind of differentiate, what maybe smaller mid-size lenders are feeling versus the larger lenders. And is it different? A lot of times we talk about lenders on now, next, later generally. So
Mhm.
if we want to start getting a little bit more specific, who are you talking to the most, and what are you hearing right now, kind of on the street from lenders' operations?
So it's interesting. I would say that the we our client bases can consist of independent mortgage bankers, community banks, and credit unions. And I think each one of them, primarily historically, they've kind of operated similar in the same fashion, but now I'm really seeing a distinct change in each one of them approaching technology in a little bit different fashion.
Mhm.
Um, so from that perspective, the globally 20,000 foot level from an Encompass standpoint, there's a lot of change going on with the SDK, the EPC conversions that's going through ICE with a deadline of coming up in the fall. So we have, most of the IMBs that we're seeing are looking at that as a necessary change and trying to say, okay, I have to deal with this. So what's our best option to get this with minimal pain and minimal change? Whereas the community banks and the credit unions, I'm looking to see, they're saying, well, we have to do this, and we potentially may have to convert to web over the next few years. So maybe this is the right time to reset the foundation and take, while volume is a little bit lower, what could we do that would least disrupt our client base while also, resetting the foundation of what we have, both from a vendor perspective and from an LOS perspective.
Okay, that is really helpful. So it sounds like IMB is going faster towards this deadline or towards LOS changes. Banks and credit unions preparing for it, but not quite there yet. Just in maybe a sentence or two, what's the significance of this SDK announcement and deadline in the fall? Because I've heard it both ways. I've heard one, it was released and it was huge breaking news and everyone should get ready for it. And then I've heard other people say, no, it's kind of a nothing burger. What's your take working in Encompass every day? What should we know just about that?
Well, ultimately, the changes are good and the changes are needed. So whether or not you embrace those changes and take advantage of them, or you just do the minimal that's amount, I think ultimately the changes are good. Now, whether or not you are willing to invest in the changes now and take advantage of what the systems have to offer and the updates are, and some of it may be, painful to the extent that you may want to change vendors to take advantage of something things. So the level of change and what you might want to embrace now varies by lender and kind of what their business model is going through.
Okay, that's helpful. So I'd like to dig in a little bit on maybe two or three, if maybe there's fewer, maybe there's more. What are some of the variables that a lender should consider to take advantage of these changes now versus in 6 months versus in 12 months? Because, I'm always trying to juggle our conversation about change management with this broader kind of LinkedIn media conversation about how mortgage is always changing. There is no constant. There's no such thing as a constant in mortgage because of the regulatory nature, the political nature, and how technology evolves in every industry. We've got kind of all of it in our
Mhm.
industry. So are there a couple of big things you point to when you talk to CEOs, when you sit down with the leaders of these lenders and say, here's what you should be thinking about? Here's some of the pieces that you need to be thinking about to get that return on this update or these types of updates?
Sure. So when I go into a lender and look at their overall tech stack and look at what they are, how how they are set up from a tech perspective, most often I'm seeing like a 5-star tech stack. They
Mhm.
have the best of the best in terms of, or the top of the vendor stacks on the LOS, POS, CRM, and PPE stack, right? That's mostly the stack and then a BI on top of that. Most of them are are operating at a very 4 or 5 star level, meaning you're working in the best of the best. Um, at the same token, when I dig a little bit deeper, the utilization within that tech stack is very, very low. So they're paying for, a 5 star tech stack, but probably only using 20% of it, maybe the LOS, maybe a little bit higher. So what I'm trying to help lenders, and lenders are coming to me for now, is trying to say, um, you know, coming out of COVID, everyone signed big contracts, and now a lot of contracts are coming up and coming due. So
Okay.
they're trying to say, look, I have, X solution. I'm not utilizing it. Is it worth it for me to stay in, or should I be looking at other, more beneficial, cost-effective solutions? And my advice to them is it depends, not trying to be vague or not, but in some cases, a 5 star POS or a 5 star PPE may not be what you need, right? You don't need to be paying for a label just because it's what everyone else has, right? You may have a very simplified model from a secondary perspective of just selling to agency and having portfolio products.
Mm-hmm.
So if that's the case, you don't need a 5 star PPE. You can basically handle a very good nuts and bolts PPE that's very
Mm-hmm.
affordable and go through it. And we're trying to help clients understand it because I think coming out of the volume increases that we had, we saw a lot of clients just go with the masses and get and say everyone else is using X, so that should be the best, and I should be utilizing that. And now that I'm hoping them reset that and refocus it both from an ROI perspective, but most importantly from a what is the right tech model for your company? Because it doesn't fit everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, our friend Brian View, early on in my relationship with him, would say the biggest thing I tell everyone is you have to be honest about who you are as a company. And if you can do that, you can be really effective in this business. You can be really profitable in this business, even in the downtimes, if you're honest about who you are. And so it's funny, I now live in Detroit, as you know. I'm now a big
Yeah.
fan of Detroit. We've gotten together when you come and visit Detroit, and Cadillac was always my example growing up as a middle class kid. It was like the Cadillac of whatever, the Cadillac of whatever. I always wanted a Cadillac. And so, like, I put in for your takeaway is like, you might not need the Cadillac of PPE if you are a straight or, originate to sell shop with Fannie Freddie direct, like you servicing released, you may not need it. I may need to update my thinking. The kids these days, it might be Lamborghini or something. I don't know, Tesla. I don't know, but I'm going to stick with Cadillac for now. But I mean, like, I think that's really hard. It is actually really hard for tech partners, for consultants, for lenders to turn around and say, like, am I being honest? Because, nobody gets fired for signing the best platform, but often they do get fired for missing cost revenue goals, for missing cost savings goals, for missing other operational goals. And so, what I guess as we kind of have one foot in now and we start to take a step into next, is that a trend we are in the middle of, the beginning of? Are we going to see more of lenders actually doing a tech stack review and finding that what we like to think of on the technology side is like consolidation? You're saying it's not exactly consolidation, it's like a better fit. There might actually be a better fit for smaller vendors, smaller technology partners might actually be a better fit if both sides get a little bit more honest about who they're serving. Maybe you could give us a sense of both sides of that. Is it lenders that need to come to that realization to make this trend happen? Is it vendors just being like, I'll sell to anyone, being like, no, don't sell to everyone. Go to this particular persona. What's going on here? How do we understand it for those on the call who are selling to lenders in particular?
So I think that from a vendor perspective, I think that the challenge that the vendors have are somewhat some vendors are kind of dead before they even get started. Meaning, um, if you bring on a certain software application that is to begin with, right from the start, a square peg in a round hole, you are asking for challenges in adoption and support and user capability, right? And in some cases, that's what happens, right? Either you have you have users who at the lender who basically are elective whether they use it or not, whether it applies to their business model or not, or what their, how big of a leap is it how big of a difference is it going to make? So, I'll just make a random example. Like if you're a construction-based lender and you're bringing on a standard POS, that construction is not their, strong suit, but you're saying we want this to be the best and the best because everyone else is using it. You know, you're the adoption is not going to be any better because everyone else is using it. If it doesn't fit your model,
Mhm.
it's not going to make a difference. So
So,
from
yeah.
a lender's perspective, I would say when you're reevaluating your technology, understanding a couple of things. How good does it fit into your model? As and by the way, it doesn't need to be 100% of your model. A 50%, pickup in your model today, if technology could add 50% efficiency uh, in your model today, that's a win for you, right? It doesn't. So
Mhm.
I see a lot of people say if it doesn't fit all, it's not. We don't need any of it. That's not a strength. But the other big piece, Jeremy, what I'm seeing and people not take advantage of, especially in the downturn, is none of this technology is set and forget, right? So if
Mhm.
you rolled out technology 3 to 4 years ago and haven't taken the last few years to understand what has happened, what has improved, what is it updated to it, and where are the new nuances to it through consolidation, new advancements, new releases, any of that. You also have to take into consideration how looking to the future, how you're going to implement it, train to it, and support it.
Mhm.
And I think very few people don't pay attention to the second two. They just
Mhm.
want this to roll out and they want people to embrace it, but that they don't take any in time to invest it in retraining and re-advancing. There are so many instances where we go into clients and saying, I had no idea that X software could do this. Why? Because you never revisited it after you rolled it out 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point we don't talk enough about, which is the two sides of that coin that I hear about as well. One is I'm going to take this and try to get it to do what I want. So, can't I get it to do HELOC? I want to add HELOC. Can't it? Your example of construction, and you're trying to get something to mold to your goal that wasn't really made for it or wasn't really built for it. And if you ask a tech entrepreneur, hey, could you make this work? They're almost always going to say yes because
Yes,
they
of
want their
course.
shot, right? They want their shot to do it. It's very difficult to say no to an opportunity to try something like that. But in reality, you as the lender and advising lenders, knowing that that's not going to fit, we hear about it all the time, but it still happens. But
Mhm.
then the other side of that coin, it sounds like, is the platform you already have can do some things you're thinking about and you don't even know it. And we hear that a lot too. And I think, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, and I think your construction example is a perfect one, but I think there's probably some more around LOS utilization percentages
Mhm.
versus POS versus PPE. You mentioned earlier that you go in and see world-class, best-in-class tech stacks, but we're not using the most of it. Are there some, maybe again, two or three, some examples of like, what's the most common thing people aren't using? What's the most common thing that is actually there that you end up saying, like, you guys can already do this. We can just turn it on for you, or we've built a module that can do within your system, within your existing contracts, what you want to do. What are some of the biggest offenders or biggest opportunity zones for that?
Uh, I'll take them. I'll give you one per
Yeah.
section. Okay. So
Yes.
for on the POS side, um, most clients are just using it as an application engine, an online
Yep.
application. And the POSs have so much more functionality than that. POS is your portal to the borrower in terms of making their experience and their member experience crucial in terms of interfacing them with updates on the loan, status updates, interfacing with getting conditions in easily, potentially looking to e-close. All of that is your window to the borrower and member. But so many people, the use of the POS dies once the application comes into the LOS. So I would say that's the first piece on the POS side. On the LOS side, I would say that the ability to accept the fact that you don't have integrated vendors at this point is unacceptable. If
Hmm.
you're working with any vendor that doesn't have a bi-directional interface with your LOS at this point, then you should be looking for other vendors. I mean, at
Hmm.
this point, with the APIs and the interconnectivity between LOSs and vendors today, there should no one ever having to go outside of the system to do something and not have that data and document come back into the LOS automatically, electronically.
Hmm.
And then on the PPE side, the auto lock functionality has dramatically increased over the past few years, and the ability for lock desks to basically have an auto lock capability where someone doesn't have to manually go in and confirm that lock, both on initial lock and relock. That's a big piece that we're seeing that people are not taking advantage of. The people that are saying, "Oh my God, I can double or triple the volume without having to add people to the lock desk. Like this is a game changer." But we still see people hesitant to do it. And understandably, it is a scary possibility if you're not used to it. But once you get used to it, in terms of the guardrails that you can build to it, the auto lock functionality is a true game changer from a secondary perspective.
Excellent. I think those are perfect examples because I think a lot of people can relate to that and are asking a lot of questions right now of trying to understand where are these optimizations, and they're getting hit back with sort of like very broad or very generic AI automation or other kind of modernization messages and not those kind of specific things. And that kind of is a segue to what you and I have been talking about a lot too, in terms of approaching these things with ROI in mind, but doing a better job of that follow through. And I wanted to make sure as we look ahead to the next 6 months, the next 12 months, again, more change to come, I'm sure, from both technology and the market. As always, can you talk a little bit about how you think about it and how you encourage lenders to think about it when they need to be able to either measure or champion or take advantage of some of these things, and either in some cases sell it to the board, sell it to their investors, or in some cases the CEO selling change down through the organization? How do you think about ROI, and how do you encourage lenders to think about it?
So it's a great topic, and there's multiple ways to look at it and slice at it. I would say that from what's going to change and what really affects the business is the refi volume, right? That's the spike that comes through that we're
Mhm.
anticipating in the next 12 to 24 months, right? And that's the difference of when volume spikes uncontrollably and we have to scurry and look to tech to try to solve these issues, right? And that's when you see the bottlenecks. You see it in underwriting, you see it in closing, and potentially post-closing. So from an ROI perspective, what are you utilizing from a technology perspective to automate the processes so that if your refi volume goes up 30 to 40% in the next 12 to 24 months,
Mhm.
how are you going to be able to substantiate that with technology that you didn't have 5 years ago when you were flooded with refis? What have you done in your tech stack to help that? And then part and parcel to what we spoke about before, what are you paying for that? Are you
Mhm.
utilizing the technology that you're paying for already? Because in theory, that's a win, right? If you already have that as a sunk cost into your P&L, and you can take your adoption of your POS from 20% to 60%, you're not paying any more for that, right? So that's a win from an
Mhm.
ROI perspective. Alternatively,
Yeah.
like we talked about before, um, you don't need to pay for the Cadillac if you're not going to utilize the Cadillac, right? If you're going to keep it in your garage and you don't need it,
Right.
you're very apt to
Yeah.
to reduce it and go down to bare bones and spend your money elsewhere. And then lastly, I would say, and this is a big one, and people don't really want to pay it, really want to give a lot of credence to it, but what is your budget for your tech support team in the future? Because
Mhm.
if you want this universally, five-star tech stack, but you used to have a team of six and they're down to two, you know, where is that growth of support going to be?
Mhm.
Because if you don't increase or budget for increasing your support team that can train and support and give you real-time answers, then it doesn't really matter what technology you have because no one will be embracing it because it's not being supported well.
I think that's a great point too, for the point you made earlier, which is, hey, look, it's probably a mistake to let everybody in your organization choose technology as optional or elective if you're cost conscious and trying to manage this thing. But that's a really practical way to think about it. If you're going to do that, if you're going to give some optionality, especially for sales, use this if you want, but you don't have to, type of thing, which we do still see a lot, especially in distributed retail, then you have to have a tech team that's dynamic enough. You can't cut your tech team and be optional elective. Like, it just doesn't, because you got to have a tech team who can then manage all these different things that people are trying to do. And I think sometimes that kind of have our cake and eat it too thing is actually creating a lot of these problems. Like Kat mentioned it in the chat, so I want to bring it up here. You know, the lender gets to decide these integrations, but I also kind of want to ask, do they? In other words, they get to say no, but to say yes often makes them captive to their LOS. Are you seeing any tension between the integrations a lender or a client needs and the cost or pain around the LOS? Or is it more discipline around goals and purpose and cost? If a lender wants it, we can typically make it happen, and the LOS isn't standing in the way. Can you talk a little bit about those types of choices?
It's interesting because I had thought probably 6 or 7 years ago that the LOS was going to be kind of minimized in our whole ecosystem in terms of where that fit in the tech stack. I thought that, it was just going to be a central depository and everything else was going to be built around it.
Yeah.
But actually, I think what's happened over the past few years, the LOS has gained more and more strength and popularity. And that's the biggest piece of the puzzle that people do not, that's the last apple that they want to bite before, to change their model because they know that's the most painful and the biggest change. So in terms of, I think there's two parts to that. Yes, lenders can decide about how they want to adopt the interfacing, but
Mhm.
the functionality of how their interface works. And look, vendors can say we're fully integrated. And what does that mean? That could mean that you have to click a button, upload a file, and then and someone has to manually upload that. That's not really integrated. Okay, clicking a button, sending an action, trigger an action, and getting a response without anyone doing anything, that's fully integrated. Okay.
Mhm.
And that's where you should be looking to get to from a lender's perspective. And if your vendor does not have that capability, whether or not utilization, that's up to you. But at a minimum, you should be setting that baseline to say, I need bi-directional interface capability within my LOS and my vendor. Whether or not what level I use that, I can
Yeah.
decide. But at a minimum, they should have that to begin with. Because if they're making you go outside to do something, a normal action to go outside of the LOS, um, then something's wrong in in that intersection, whether it's the LOS or the vendor that doesn't have that capability, but they should be at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So we always like to end on the later, but I also promised earlier that we would be pretty specific with this conversation. I think we've achieved that. So I want to end on
Well,
something that is later that you just mentioned, but that is also pretty specific. I get really excited, and this comes from my time at Rocket. But one of the things that always got my data nerd brain working at Rocket was triggering tasks or workflows or entire frameworks for a product off of data attributes alone, that we know what's coming in as it comes in from that POS structure that you talked about. As we see, what do we know about this client already from our database or our lead gen or our servicing platform, added to what we just found out and collected from POS and sales, we're actually triggering vendors and triggering workflows and putting it in a calendar in our workflow off of data attributes. So what you just said was like, lenders need to be thinking about this definition of integration against the data and capabilities, who clicks what, what is data trigger versus what a human clicks. It feels like what you're saying is that's later. That's where we're going. The next 6 to 12 months, lenders below the top five in size need to be thinking this way. Do you have a thought on where we're going with that? What is triggering or clicking or instigating tasks mean as in your world as you start to help people modernize that way? Where is this all headed?
So I think that, and we haven't, I can't believe this has been a tech discussion and we're approaching the end and we haven't mentioned the two initials AI that everyone wants to speak to.
Yeah.
But, you know, that is, in my opinion, that's kind of like how AI fits into this model, which everyone thinks about, is really depends upon our business is based on exceptions, right?
Right.
It's basically a loan process is a bunch of if-then statements. If this, then this applies. If this, this applies. And how are you going to handle those exceptions to your point in terms of the vendor option, right? So
Yeah.
it's not when everything works perfectly, all right? You have a clean loan, you have a great, a good property and comes back, no exceptions on the appraisal, and it's a low LTV, low FICO, and they want to close in 2 weeks. That should work fine through technology. All of that should work fine. It's it's the nuances of when the appraisal comes back short, or when you have to get MI on a loan, now what? Or you got a negative report on title that comes back. How are you going to transfer those exception-based workflows, and how are you going to process them? Are those going to funnel back to the one processor or the one underwriter that's doing the loan? Or are you going to have a team that's set up, okay, here's my clean loan team, and here are my exceptions that trail off. And basically, they handle the one-offs to get those exceptions back onto the train. And I think that's kind of how we're trying to help clients understand how much of your business is exception based, and how much of it, how do you want to restructure both your team and your technology to basically make sure that you're able to get back on track.
Yeah, that's a great final takeaway. Most lenders don't need AI for operations and underwriting on clean loans, on your typical Fannie Freddie loans. What we need is, the exception business is how do you identify them? When do you identify them in your process? And what do you do about it when you do? And thinking about it that way will actually make a lot more progress in your business than just applying AI will. But we
Exactly.
know AI will help identify them for you. You still need someone thinking about it this way. So, well, that's why I had you on. That's why we turned to you. It's also what we like to talk about here on Now Next Later. So it sounds like we need to have you back and talk more about this. But thank you everyone for joining. Reach out to Frank. He's on LinkedIn. You can reach out to me and we can connect. And obviously, this will be on YouTube to share. And we'll be back again next week. Next Monday, Sasha will be back from vacation. So we'll ask her about that and talk to you then. So thank you for joining us, Frank. It's always great to see you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Can't thank you enough for this. Appreciate it.
Take
Great to talk
care.
to
Take care, everyone. Thank you.
you. Bye.
Bye.